Yeah, I'm just going to do a quick lighting. I'm not going to do anything, but I'm just going to get a look. Because, when I got this off of YouTube, this particular jet, it's Putin's presidential jet even shocked Trump. Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I actually made this copy, Trump's picture wasn't on it, yeah. So somewhere between there and Office Depot, it's kind of like now, it's kind of like in any case, yeah, so that's a particular location seemed to be part of a StarGate program. I'm not real sure if my memory actually serves me correctly about being lifted high. So, anyway, I'm probably just going to mention a real quick, because I'm going to wait till I get on my lighting, on my powers, really, not real down, kind of down, yeah. But anyway, yeah, so, I'm going to take a look at this, and right now the lighting's just not really going to be what it is, but I just want to see what it looked like here in this particular setting here. But if I'm not mistaken, I think that something in my mind, considering what is going on during the StarGate program, I'm almost for certain that probably the Airbus H-160 helicopter pilots and crew may be a part about this particular thing right here about it. Yeah, because it seemed that had also included a Geneva, Switzerland, and the BN venue, and I kind of have been focusing on the Boolean chart about sequencing characterization and sets of 6. Okay, and something about Dr. Pepper and her 23-year anniversary celebration, and the 23 ingredients, and the 23rd letter being W, and ultimately Fox 29 News in Philadelphia, and W Television, proper English grammatical composition. About, predominantly, automatically it's when a P is visible, it's pronounced, and when the P is visible, it's silent, applied to the W actually being 2 V's, yeah, and the VP and the VP that way. About a Vice President network, and it seemed to be that even, like a Nelson John song, Philadelphia Freedom, it seems to be ultimately getting to the thing that seemed to be linked somewhere between, in my mind, of, Benjamin Franklin, flying a kite, and, geographic somewhere in between, Theodore to Franklin Roosevelt, and what Philadelphia is, the Independence Day and the 200-year celebration of America, and, Independence Day, and, all that stuff about ratifying and codifying law, and all that good stuff. So, in any case, yeah, so, all that connectivity with Fox 29 News seems to have a little bit of significance, but this one particular picture here, it seems to be, if my memory serves me correctly, I just want to make a quick note about it, because it seemed to be that somehow in my mind the helicopter pilots of the Airbus H-160 seem to be, how true it is, I'm not real sure. But normally when I'm talking or mentioning anything about a StarGate program, really it's kind of a 25, 30 year period ago, if not 35, really. And really, predominantly the only reason why I really am talking about it is because memory had become, a significant issue about memory, minus the fact of being 35 in NASA, and Texas is automatically Austin, Texas, and the state capital, and Highway 35 that way, or kind of like a scale between, Interstate I-35 and Highway 35 here in Pearland, and the misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi, and the ISS and the SSI that way of International Superstar and Supplemental Security Income, or, International Secret Service, and Secret Service Intelligence, yeah, Superstar Intelligence, yeah. So, in any case, so, I was kind of thinking about this, because there was something about the Air Force One 737 and the white interior, and I'm trying to actually place my memory, but it seemed to be the black and blue thing of Chris Tomlin during the StarGate program of the Mind's Eye, okay. And I'm going to wait till I get on my light and a little bit more power to do it, but I just kind of want to do this, just kind of refresh my memory and think about how I'm going to present maybe something about it. But in any case, so the thing with this is that I'm thinking that this one particular, if I can get a good shot of it, maybe a little closer right there, I'm thinking that would be, because there was certain locations of, normally when I say, and there was a television series and a movie Taken, and it seemed to be ultimately motivated by several other television series, titles Leave Without a Trace, and SVU and certain other factors that seem to be significant of the way. But yeah, this one particular jet is identified as Putin's presidential jet, and I'm thinking, if my memory serves me correctly, I'm not real sure if it's true, if my memory serves me correctly, but I'm thinking if it's anything to do with like some of the content of the black and blue thing, and like locations in the mind's eye. Chris Tomlin's like video Holy Forever is like virtually for certain is like one of the big deals about the mind's eye. Yeah, and Brian Adams, I thought I died and gone to heaven, and certain factors that seem to be linked between like the silver silk screen as compared to a hologram. And the black and blue, you know, in that video is kind of like there's certain locations and various other locations, you know, I was like actually taken to on a gurney, in a wheelchair. How I even got there, I mean, for real, not even sure, but I'm thinking it's somewhere in between one particular location. If it's the same location, different days, same hour of day, kind of like thing, it would be probably the blue and white. Two separate Airbus H-160 helicopters, in the blue one doing like a 360. It may have done it both ways. I'm actually trying to place my memory because I don't really know why the memory minus de facto is something big, but obviously, you know, that's obviously a determining factor and a new whole point of view of like maybe identifying like a circuit as a StarGate program. You know, automatically going through like a circuit, I mean, it's not like, at least mine at the time anyway, an automatic perception of the StarGate program, because I mean, that was like not really even on my mind other than a book, Psychic Warrior, Psychic Warrior, America's Foremost Psychic Spy, and the cover up of the top secret CIA StarGate program. And some of that content, okay, like the guy on the cover, okay, is like underwater. Okay, and I mean for real, like a baptism, okay, on the front cover of that, okay, and the name of the author's last name is like Morehouse. I'm actually trying to place if it's like a Robert Morehouse or William Morehouse or Ken or you know, or a Combine, but it seems to be like if there is, I'm actually trying to place my memory if it's like all three names, like Robert, William, and like yeah. Robert, William, and Ken. And it seems it has the significance of the Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shadow Government StarGate program with those particular three names of men. Even more so the Colonel, you know, when it gets to the Ken, the Colonel, and like computer programming and language and what it is as a partition as compared to maybe a storage file or some other type of you know, memory file, and whether if the partition is really the idea of the kernel really being some factor identifying what participation is or is not with architecture platform embedded in encryption. It seemed to be, you know, really the deal about the kernel and Colonel Sanders. Yeah, the Colonel Sanders, yeah. The Securities and Annuities Network and the Storage Area Network. Colonel Sanders, yeah, you know, oh, that smudge-proof hieroglyphic, you know, smudge-proof hieroglyphics, yeah. Seemed to be the thing about the finger looking good about Colonel Sanders is like the smudge-proof hieroglyphics. Huh. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, so like, anyway, I'm trying to get a good setting here about the light in here, and I'm probably just going to do it again because, but like, somewhere in my mind, you know, when memory became like a major factor, and I'd realize, you know, maybe it's 6 to 9 months, maybe even a year now, and it seemed to be like the duration of what's involved with Geneva, if it's going to be like a 3-month, I mean, if it's like, why one pronoun of the 4 types of pronouns cannot be used as a subject, I mean, like automatically now being a factor of like realizing that I'd been operated on while I was asleep. Ultimately, you know, retroactively now, I mean, it seemed to be a thing about, you know, the footprint on the birth certificate, as compared to even, you know, like a circumcision, or even the deal about, you know, like God created woman with one rib of a man. And, I mean, ultimately it's getting to, like, what television programming is or is not as a deed restriction. I mean, ultimately it seems to be whether or not they've really, I mean, if the whole idea of an entire nation being presented some I don't know if I would call it opportunity, but I mean, it's sort of like, presidents and governors and parental guidance and pro-golf associations or any factor that would introduce maybe the perception of participating factor that seemed to be ultimately getting to the footprint on the birth certificate, or a preliminary prejudice, a product registration of a birth certificate. And at the time of birth, when a footprint is put on a birth certificate, the humerus bone is, I'm assuming, right at, on average, at like 4 inches of a newborn child, okay? And ultimately, like a beginning, it seemed to be like a beginning year of what is involved, the humerus bone between the shoulder and the elbow, or the pi r squared factor, even in anatomy and relation. And, I mean, for real, so like, in any case, so it seemed to be the forecast of the weather that way. I mean, if it's the ultimate deal of a combine of God created woman with one rib of a man, or it ultimately gets to, the humerus bone, or even a circumcision. It's kind of like, I haven't ever heard of it, like, referred to in political science. And I'm not going to really focus on this because it's not that I'm not in the mood or trying to avoid a situation. It's just that really I'm not trying to find this to actually talk about when, like, so much other is, like, really involved, okay? But, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to about the footprint on a birth certificate or circumcision, or what a PG-13 rating is, or presidents and governors, or parental guidance, or pro-golf association, as compared to a circumcision, as compared to, I've never heard not one preacher refer to circumcision as masturbation, or the thought of a manufactured situation that would only suggest that God created a woman with one rib of a man. I mean, if it's ultimately the idea of a deed restriction and television programming, I mean, would it be based upon maybe African Americans and particularly parallel sexes? I mean, if it's the deed restriction as compared to what consensual agreed represents a consensual participation, okay? The thing is that it really seemed to me that really ultimately that the word is relation between architecture and platform of computer programming and language. It's really the whole idea about, what I have to say about it at a degree level. And ultimately, McDonald's Golden Arches, about being a degree level of reputable center, consensual participation, and the one cycle in oscillation, okay, in the center line of oscillation at a 90 degree looks like a center point, okay, or, like even as a 7 point, or like the Statue of Liberty. The thing is that ultimately it seems to be that whether or not if a circumcision is at a time of a humerus stone projected estimate as what seems to be now like the Chevrolet IROC Z28 and the Spore Stone in the ocean. I mean, even the Baptists, I mean, for real, like at this point, I mean, if the only deal about why one pronoun of the 4 types of pronouns cannot be used as a subject, would it be more so about the Spore Stone, a pronoun, cannot be used as a subject? I mean, would it be, I've said it before, and I'm going to, continually refer to it as, I mean, is that like a dog pissing on a tree? Or is it really ultimately getting to, like landscaping and what a neighborhood is or is not to the monetary and domestic aggregate as compared to the gross national product, and somewhere in my mind automatically the commercial unit of living quarter, and how a preliminary prejudice of product registration of the birth certificate seem to have that all this information I'm talking about now has some kind of combine of dimensional clause of Washington, D.C. being the thing about the a telepathic eagle, or, or television, or Washington, and the D.C. thing about direct circuit or dimensional clause, more so in that way, and what that is to, the misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi, and the International Supplemental Security Income, and the thing about ratio between HTTP : double / and the ratio : seems to be the thing about the colon and the ratio between the ISS and SSI that way. And ultimately now, like with the Chevrolet IROC Z28, it's also the alphanumerics of like 213. Yet it presents, like Rock Me Amadeus. I mean, if a preliminary prejudice of product registration of a birth certificate is all about a vice president network or immigration's custom enforcement being used in a way of importing and exporting or the thought of like exchange commission in the way of securities and annuities, or what having fair use is of patented products protected by tariff, a 200-mile area around the United States, as compared to a moat around a Kingsman ship, and all that information. It seemed to be, reflecting some idea of jurisprudence as compared to jurisdiction, or what a breach is or is not, or the thing about protected issues or international law of intellectual property having fair use, what is simply and easily ergonomic. Of easements, not always and limited to, but the real deal about human capital. Ultimately, it seems to be the way everything is designed, that human capital is the determining factor of how the kernel is used or is not in circuit. Even in television programming, where the not if a deed restriction is simply television programming, and ultimately, really, an entire nation. Whether parental guidance is just the idea of generation of just like you don't have to say anything about it, kind of like, really, it convinced me that really that woman was created with one rib of a man. It's only like in my mind now the potential of an entire world, of every money on the entire planet, manufacturing some idea of like a surgery of a newborn child, and the rib thing, and it being identified and like a secret as a deed restriction. What the separation between church and state is or is not going to be, or what the pronoun really is in that way. Why one pronoun of the 4 types of pronouns cannot be used as a subject. Would it be the one hood ornament of a rectangle that would be maybe the thought of international financial management as a rib, or a hood ornament instead of a rib? The rectangle, ultimately it's getting to even a rib. So like, what's the difference between a rectangle and anatomy, one rib? Is it age group? A lifespan of what only lifespan is in intellectual property? Maintaining, some consistency, a progression, or what meaning and value and content of the information is as compared to how it's used and approached. It seemed to be that ultimately, that Chevrolet IROC Z28 is not limited to. Now, it seems to be like the spore stone used in orthopedic surgery to replace missing or damaged bone. And likewise, the rock me Amadeus thing, and even the rectangle identifying what seemed to be the significant thing of like an entire century of generation after generation. Even biblical prophecy referring to the 3rd and 4th generation. Ultimately, in my mind, it's ultimately getting to like the alphanumerics of like Z78 and Z104 of the 4. If you want to call a generation the alphabet from A to Z, from 1 to 26, then all over again. From 27 to 52, then 53 to 78, then 79 to 104. Each from A to Z being like a generation. Alphanumerically, if it just needs to mean that, but in any case, so like it seems to be that one deal. If it's ultimately like a deed restriction, or the separation between church and state, it's phenomenally. It's apparently as huge as the secret gets, like on the entire planet, or what annuity is as compared to settlement, or what having fair use really is only of, the thought of maybe intellectual as a way of like television programming, or identifying only what a neighborhood is ultimately proven to be, like even in my explanations to what seemed to be involving the monetary and domestic aggregate of the neighborhood, and ultimately seemed to be the loss prevention side of like suppression, as compared to like in my mind the word obstruction of justice seems to be the thing of a protected U.S. patent, and the freedoms of the annuity that would maybe not even having a need of state statutes or color code in that way. And still the thing about intellectual having fair use, and not experiencing some idea of projected estimate option in the future as a proxy, or some joint venture and merger as an affiliate, or or the idea that a national security issue would only present maybe the thought of like defense as compared to enforcement and that way, or you know, the thing with this is that ultimately it seems to be that the Spore Stone is representing several factors in my mind of like the Chevrolet IROC Z28 and the Rock Me Amadeus. I mean, ultimately, I mean, is it getting to prosecution as a deed restriction? Is it considered a deed restriction as excuse me, as God created woman with one rib of a man? It's a light in here. I'm gonna have to maybe do a little bit here, maybe a little more, yeah. But anyway, so it seemed to be really that the deal about even the rib. I mean, I see how phenomenally huge. I mean, how huge an extremely huge secret is. Obviously, and obviously a phenomenally huge secret. Okay, and you know what a presidents and governors, as compared to parental guidance, only is to what a neighborhood is as compared to, you know, a high-rise building or a commercial venue, living quarter. Only what opportunity might only really mean seems to be the difference between if anyone can like attach and connect the connectivity of television programming as a deed restriction. Normally the word opportunity is like crime of opportunity. Like on every television programming that refers to opportunity, and eventually it'll ultimately get to criminology, crime of opportunity. Yet, you know, the deal about equal employment opportunity doesn't refer to as equal employment opportunity in any kind of way involving criminology. But, I mean, really? I mean, being led to believe that would maybe be, maybe just not knowing, maybe, huh? How they themselves, as you know, the quadritator applicator, what it being within description is or is not as a projected estimate or actual, you know, real time. The thing is that ultimately, you know, I mean, is it really getting to why one pronoun, the four types of pronouns can be used as a subject? I mean, is it ultimately getting to a deed restriction of like even an X-ray of like God created woman with one rib of a man? Or is it the Humorous Spore Stone that seemed to be like really ultimately from like 1964, my birth year, has ultimately been, you know, like being in my thought like after a baptism. It seemed to be, I mean, ultimately, you know, the Six Flags thing about, you know, a VPN being six, alphanumeric, and Six Flags representing, and I'll get to the flag thing later, but it seemed to be like ultimately a birth year of 1964 involving English language seemed to be like the year about the American, and 64 and HTTP colon // and computer programming and language that way, and all the alphanumerics of 64 in the movie, and what auditing legal media is as compared to some idea of post-production in film and motion picture as a movie. As compared to auditing legal media, it would be, you know, the reality of maybe not a need of auditing really anything. And you know, the way of life is kind of like auditing anything would be maybe not actually already being in a commercial venue of living quarter, having the freedoms is some idea of like an ergonomic factor protected beyond some idea of anything other of what availability only means in relation. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to an intellectual deal about degree level of information as having fair use of what relation is as an ergonomic factor, leading to some idea of a degree level of reputable centers of consensual participation as compared to other factors that would only maybe be only suppression and loss prevention, and people not realizing the exact opposite way of thinking is actually the category that is, and loss prevention is just like another day of turning television on involving criminology, okay? Predominantly of K television and really, ultimately, even W television. It seemed to be the thing about Philadelphia Freedom that presents it, and you know, I haven't heard any idea about world news or national news identifying, you know, anything other than in my mind like an Elton John song, Philadelphia Freedom. Similarly, the thing about whether or not if a proper English numerical composition identifies the W television network as a VP and a VP, and proper English numerical composition that way, and identifies, you know, that principle applied to the difference between the county and the country, and the list goes on, and now it seems to be the thing about, you know, W television and Fox 29 News in Philadelphia, and the Boolean chart, and it seems the significance of Dr. Pepper, and a medical power of attorney being used, a medical power of attorney used in fiction and real estate as a deed restriction, and the DR of Dr. Pepper being a deed restriction, and a color code at the same time. Yet a carbon footprint of carbonated water seem to be, the additives, preservatives, and byproducts that used to be identified. I haven't even looked really or paid attention But I noticed that I had to backtrack and look back and see how long I'd realized I didn't see the additives, preservatives, and byproducts on, like normally edible, food, even more so dry goods. But the thing is that, that's not anything other than maybe the thought of maybe the Rockme Amadeus. And, the thing of it is that Rockme Amadeus doesn't really suggest maybe anything other than, in my mind, now seem to be a rectangle identifying, what's going on during the StarGate program as a projected estimate option in the future of the entire world of, like, international banking systems using immigration and custom enforcement as an importing and exporting issue, as international financial management, and identifying, certain factors of different monies around the entire world of importing and exporting, and how securities and annuities, what that is to having fair use of an endorsement. Really, ultimately, that's the thing about intellectual property, having fair use, but not claiming ownership of the rights. And I mean, for real. So like all that, having the right to assemble the freedom of speech and the freedom of press, and don't be fooled by imitations. And believe me, really, practice makes perfect. The thing is that ultimately, if intellectual is only a duration of lifespan, and why one pronoun, 4 types of pronouns cannot be used as a subject. Ultimately, is it ultimately getting to contesting whether or not the political science majors are the only ones that doesn't have one rib missing from their, like rib cage. Ultimately, it seems to be like a big deal about presidents and governors, whether knowing or not knowing is just the only reality about what a deed restriction is, as some idea between separation between church and state, or the idea that God created a woman with one rib of a man, and ultimately, from then on, it seems to be whether or not if intellectual property is the only thought of why one pronoun of 4 types, and hopefully it gets to the spore stone and the humerus bone of, like, between the shoulder and elbow. And during the StarGate program, it really seemed to be based upon a baptism of 1992, June 14th, 1992, at the Mormon Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, and the Galveston County thing about Friendswood, Texas, okay? And all the telepathic brainwaves in Chevrolet Silverado Z71, and, the Chevrolet IROC Z28, and the telepathic brainwaves thing about the Alphamerx 213, and ultimately, even the thing about Orion performance monitoring, it seemed to be even the thing about One Justice Park, ultimately getting to Aryan Justice Park, and it seemed to be the thing about, a transition from the Orion performance monitoring, the AOL thing about becoming Arian and Aryan. And it's just, and now it seems to be, I see how phenomenally huge the secret is, okay? And it seemed to be really a transition of identifying whether or not the Orion performance monitoring and all this stuff about, federal, state, and local authorities and architecture and platform identifying a color code, automatically, debates things like the color of sand and pronunciation as sand software and securities and annuities network, or storage area network, and international financial management. Automatically, the color of the interior, it's just like automatic, like, at a certain point, getting involved with, like, alphanumeric linguistics really because of a baptism, okay? And the thing with this, it seemed to be that 1992, June 14th, seems to present, the alphanumerics of 50 being like June or America, and the Mormon thing about Utah, even Springdale being the thing about, like Zion, National Park in Zion being the alphanumerics of 64 or HTTP : or an American, and all the alphanumerics of 64 involving HTTP : /, or the ratio //. Well, ultimately, it seems to be that ultimately that during a StarGate program between predominantly, going through the circuit of like 1994, 95, and 1996, and that there was a duration, a 6 to 9 month period, which might be like an entire year now. And I'm thinking that something about Geneva, Switzerland would present either a 3-month or a 4-month period of neutrality that seemed to be significance between Univision and 3 pastels in a black and 3 pastels in a white, and a transition beyond making a grade of beyond Internet Protocol of local area network of maritime law seemed to be the deal about J. Edgar Hoover, and the amphibious thing beyond the idea of categorization, which seems to be a grid of redundant frequency involving only neighborhoods as an entire landscaping of, like, a deed restriction of television programming. I'm actually going to have to really get serious about the difference between the Federal Communications Commission and the redundant frequency and what signal strength is as a grid. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to the altitude or clearance not obstructed by, each other in the neighborhood, or, the altitude really getting beyond, the tree line. Similarly, the deal about the amphibious thing about J. Edgar Hoover and making a grade beyond Internet Protocol for Local Area Network of Maritime Law, and how the acronym FCC ultimately, in my mind, seemed to be the Univision thing. And all the, everything that I'm talking about, like at the beginning, progressively from, my birthday of 1964, none of the information was, like, made available or identified, in any kind of way. Although, somewhere it's like, for it is written, and like it's going to happen involving the Treasury, or an eternal Treasury, or an electronic power situation, just putting names on manufactured product, or U.S. patent, or what the deal is about, immigration customs enforcement in a way of like if it's like the idea of tradition, or, culture, or history in a way of like transition as identifying the euro dollar for, not that the word has to be example, but the euro dollar, like in my mind, is automatically about the symbolic representation between the C and the PTIS on the backside of the US $1 bill, because it's haloed, okay? But, in my mind, there's computation in my mind automatically, really because of a baptism, looking for answers that had ultimately led to alphanumerics. And, a good solid 5 to 7 years of alphanumerics alone before I even got serious about, using linguistics and using two numbers, which seem to be the only idea between M is N and N is M, 13 is 14, 14 is 13. And when the alphabet's reversed, okay, those are the two center letters, and 13 is 14, 14 is 13, and the alphanumerics are 55, okay? And that's when I really kind of started getting serious, I guess, after about 5 to 7 years of alphanumerics, starting to think about linguistics, and combine an analytical and symbolic representation of a combine of, like, alphanumerics and language as compared to symbolic representation and analytical, using a two-number approach to that. And it became more compatibility, more so than, like, comparison, or the same thing, what's really important in programming. So like in any case, so like it really got to the point that compatibility was really more of an issue on an alphanumeric linguistic way as an analytical and symbolic. And that's normally the word anyway with like computer programming language anyway. But it's kind of like I had mentioned a little bit earlier. It's almost like it's verbatim, the idea of like I'm going to have to think about it, because I just thought of it for the first time and was actually kind of referring to verbatim and like a screensaver and a diaphragm. Because the word in relation, okay, is between architecture and platform and embedded encryption, okay, and how the ethnic background seemed to be the idea of a 90 degree of the equator. And even the misappropriation, the allocation of the Mississippi, but it seemed to be really the ethnic background and the golden arches representing a ethnic background. Even the American Express, a Bluebird card, seemed to be a deal about innovation leading the way and cutting edge technology, about the gold edge, and the difference between that, even a Freddie Prinze Chico stick, seemed to be that, and seemed to be about the ethnic background thing about it, So like anyway, so like I'm going to go ahead and kind of like take a break here, but anyway, during the StarGate program, it seemed to be like something about the being venue, and I had to realize all because like world news and national news had presented some more information actually identifying and showing the actual rectangle. Normally when I refer to a rectangle having an alphanumeric value, is normally identifying a commercial venue or a high-rise building, and the real issue during the StarGate program is whether knowing or not knowing if it was identified with the rectangle or engraved lettering identifying a building, or a specific, for my eyes only thing, or an intellectual duration of only what lifespan means as intellectual. And that really is the terminology and definition of intellectual property. And my thing about Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shuttle Government StarGate program and what lifespan is or is not, based upon nanoluminance and the thought of like a 13-band graphic equalizer using all the information. Because really, it's only the vision, because of the incoherence and things that had been involved, and not even knowing that memory had been an issue is really what the deal is. I mean, just like thinking it's just like the next day has really become an entire world of like television networks, and not really the situation at all. It seemed to be the real deal about a duration of six to a 9 month period, if not an entire year, about incoherence and a military barrel determinant in the mind's eye and certain factors about being taken like all over various places around the entire world. And it seemed to be like whether or not they've really if the Midnight Blue identifies the Air Force One, only because of the acronym of the FBI. The thing about the FBI being an acronym is an acronym. It is an acronym, and it is. And it seems to be whether or not if the U.S. dollar is claiming a attachment or detachment as maybe what would geographically not be like the United States as a different region protected by the FBI, yet presenting the connectivity assumed to be of the U.S. dollar. And the euro dollar really kind of suggests that as region 2, the halo symbolic representation between the C and the PTIS. Automatically, it's the Statue of Liberty in my mind and a 7-point crown of the 7 nations, 7 monies of Europe. And it seemed to be a different thing about information from identifying a country as compared to a nation or commonwealth as 7 different monies, 7 different nations. And there had been like some integrating factor of like identifying whether a nation is a country or not, or a golf course, or 7 monies, or 7 country clubs, or 7 nations and 7 different monies, identifying however many regions. Or states, or province. Province would probably be more so the word of color code of world history and identifying world class as a pastel green. And the thing about the alphanumerics of 73 and pastel being like Harris in Egypt and Israeli, and the connectivity of religion between separation between church and state, and the alphanumerics of 73 and Harris and Union and Egypt and Israeli and other factors involving that. Yeah, so it seems to be that the pastel is the link between the conversion from analog to digital that way, from the monochrome. And it seemed to have the significance in my mind, and ultimately I'm going off in a whole different direction that I really didn't intend on. But it seemed to be like the Vertical magazine. I'm going to get right back to what I originally started. The Vertical magazine, okay, is predominantly of commercial helicopters. Alvin Community College in Alvin, Texas has presented the availability of commercial pilots in that way. But in any case, it's kind of like it ultimately leads to something like Vertical magazine, or the Airbus like H-160 and not limited to. But it seemed to be the thing about really that particular deal about Vertical magazine, and the Japanese being 7-1 in Pearland, and the 90-degree being like the alphanumerics of Brazoria, and the 90-degree right angle, and the alphanumerics of 90 in Brazoria, and the movie, All the Right Stuff, and a 90-degree right angle ultimately seemed to be in my mind involving, the Airbus H-160 during the StarGate program, and Japanese, from like English, reading it from left to right to reading Japanese from top to bottom, and a 90-degree that way. And it seems to be the connectivity of that magazine, Vertical magazine, of the helicopters of presidential commercial helicopters, predominantly of that magazine. And the thing about this one particular picture right here, and some idea of memory minus the factor being 35. And this is year 2025, and ultimately in my mind it's the 35th year. Predominantly it seemed to be of the color code of like AT&T International Network Operations Center, and the idea that AT&T taken over Southwestern Bell in 1990, and 35 years later being this year 2025. But anyway, it seemed to be that the Vertical magazine presents some information. It really seems to be the Chris Tomlin song Holy Forever and the Black and Blue thing, even a song of like Sammy Hagar and Van Halen about the OU812 thing about the black and blue thing. And the 90-degree right angle seemed to be the Vertical magazine of presidential helicopters. And ultimately it seemed to be like lifted high about the phrase and content of Chris Tomlin's songs and the mind's eye of the black and blue thing. But it seemed to be, in my mind, it seemed to be the pilots and crews involving the presidential helicopters of Vertical magazine. And even being lifted high at a 90-degree with all the information I'm talking about now, seemed to be ultimately this one particular, and how true it is, I'm not sure if my memory serves me correctly, but it would almost have to be in my mind, being lifted, vertically during StarGate program is a thing. And I'm not sure if my memory serves me correctly. And ultimately, it seemed to be a thing about, being on Air Force One 737, but it likewise the interior of this particular deal. I'm thinking that there's an actual room for an surgical operating room on this particular jet. I'm not sure if my memory serves me correctly, at all. But it seemed to be like in my mind that it would be the vertical crew of the Airbus H-160 and the helicopter crews of presidential, helicopters of that one magazine that would be maybe more so, I think, involved during that particular time of this particular one jet right here. And I'm not sure if I actually was in it. I'm thinking that maybe, see, here's the thing about when I say taking it in coherence and StarGate program, that there's a duration. I'm an extremely intense incoherence and really more so vision and, language and computing language, just really in the thing about the incoherence that I'm referring to during StarGate program, and only the vision. And, recouping any kind of memory about it would still be the vision and, the ability to compute language later. That many years later, 20, 25, 30, 35 years later, based upon the vision and recognizing it as a photographic memory and computing language at that point. That's the kind of incoherence that I'm really referring to. Is normally like of a newborn child. And when, like even when I open my eyes for the first time, language, people automatically know that a newborn child's memory is more so a vision, not even, having any concept of like language or identifying factors that way as a thought process. But this being a StarGate program during 1994, 1995, 96, really a 10-year circuit, really taking more than 16 years, really an entire lifetime. Now that, the deal about the forecast and We International and the Humorous Bone and GMC's Raising a Bar, and it seemed that all this information has ultimately led to like information being provided. Because when I actually started talking about when I knew for the first time that memory had become a phenomenally huge deal, and that's when I really started identifying my thought of what I decided to be the Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shuttle Government Stargate program. It was only at that point that I'd realized a 25 to 30 year period had passed, and I wouldn't have remembered, not one thing about it, unless some idea of like world news or national news, or even, factors of YouTube being participating factors, kind of like rejuvenating and activating like a memory. It's almost like the Earth, Wind, and Fire song, Do You Remember? Never Was a Cloudy Day, and, the Earth, Wind, and Fire song, it seemed to be, Do You Remember? It seemed to be the deal of pretty much of a Stargate program. And that's really the issue of, like, in my mind, like, memory amounts to fact of being 35. And ultimately, human capital of, using Texas as some idea of, like, the state capital as Austin, Texas, and Austin Powers Lubonic paralegal thing about it. Yeah. So it seemed to be like ultimately, that this one particular deal is that, if my memory serves me correctly, the Air Force One, I think it was all the white interior. I may have laid down, actually went to sleep on the bed in there. And how long was there? I'm not really sure is what the deal is, because for a 6 to a 9 month period, maybe even a year now, and it only seemed to be the neutrality of like Geneva, Switzerland as summit meetings, and the factors of the being venue, and even the one particular car of the 2015 Geneva, Switzerland summit meeting, the Lexus LFSA, and everything that I've known and talked about already on my channel at WadeASVPriddy, Priddy at YouTube.com, and WadeArianSVPriddy, Priddy at YouTube.com. That seems to be that referring to even the Lexus LFSA is like the Mercedes-Benz presenting the Smart for 2 car. And even, the factor of like Centerpoint Energy, the smart meter, and, Agent 99 and Chevy Chase is 99 and telepathic, and the teepee thing, telepathic teepee of a Native American Indian, even the Statue of Liberty, and the Centerpoint, crown as a telepathic teepee. And the thing with this is that ultimately that all that information that has got to the point of the vertical magazine, and ultimately, the thing about the a 90 degree, and I just want to include this. And I'm just kind of, I'm probably going to do this again. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to upload this particular one right here, but I'm thinking that it would have to be the vertical magazine and the presidential helicopters, and the crews of like the vertical magazine and the Airbus H-160, and the color code of what seemed to be in my mind, like AT&T International Network Operations taking over Southwestern Bell as some idea of like identifying 1990 as like Brazoria, or the 90-degree right angle that way, and the difference between like Japanese and English being, like a 90-degree right angle of like language, and ultimately leading to quantum and going beyond calculus of computative formulation, going beyond calculus of formulative computation of structure in quantum. Ultimately, the font size even of like Diners Club, and the seemed to be the grayscale applied to the blue transitioning. I think it may have been only 5, and the font size was different of the Diners Club, about their circle with a line in it. And it's really the deal about font size and the 5 shades of like progressively, what was predominantly blue, not like a transition of blue into the the shades of blue getting to a midnight blue. I think it was like, I know it's the font size, and I think it was only 5 shades of grayscale. And the deal about Diners Club being 107 in military and quantum, and that one line seemed to be presenting all that information. But anyway, so it seemed to be the deal about, if this is one location, it seemed to be in my mind, that would be Putin's presidential jet even shocked Trump, is what it's identified on YouTube as, is headlining that. And I'm thinking if it's anything, it would be the vertical thing about getting on. I'm not sure if my memory serves me correctly like right now, but I'm thinking that is the one that has, I think, an emergency operating room in it. I'm really not sure if my memory serves me correctly about it. I mean, at all. But I know that there were certain like ideas of like the size of jet and what's involved, and I'm not sure if it's this jet or another jet, but there was like the interior, and I think one of the jets had phenomenally huge like desk, and but anyway, so like in any case, it seemed to be ultimately that I just thought I'd mention that because it seemed to be some kind of significance, and I'm not real sure if that's really the issue with this particular jet at all. I mean, at all, really at all. But somewhere in my mind, it seemed to be a significance, something involving the Spore Stone and the Bureau of Vital Statistics and the Write Me Amadeus thing and the Spore Stone and the pronoun, the linguistics, the alphanumerics, and GMC raising a bar, promissory notes, and the idea of the forecast and why one pronoun, the 4 types of pronouns, cannot be used as a suffix. It's ultimately getting to like really, God created woman with one rib of man, and ultimately the thing about the Spore Stone being the humorous bun. And, really, I mean, ultimately, if it's getting to a footprint and circumcision of presidents and governors, defining what parental guidance only means to a newborn of 1964, or the thought of, like, ultimately getting to the word relation, okay, or some idea in that way. I mean, I haven't heard not one word, and I'm actually, probably one of the only people you'll probably ever hear talking about something like this, involving, I've even requested, what does the church think about that as far as like a circumcision and masturbation being like 137 in Washington, D.C.? I mean, is that the idea of categorization of money, or COVID ID 19, or really the deed restriction? I mean, does it mean that relation is not the word, or is questionable as maybe option, as opportunity, as masturbation, or what, circumcision? Or would they be the presidential governors of like parental guidance, then defining what it means on putt-putt golf course as compared to an 18-hole golf course? Some idea of like a ratio between HTTP colon ratio, double forward slash, or the colon, or it's like, well, or a political science drum major. And it seems to be the thing right now. It seems to be like whether or not if a verbatim is presenting some idea of a diaphragm as a screensaver, or all that infrastructure. I mean, so like, ultimately, really, I mean, if it's really God created woman with one rib of a man, does that include circumcision? Or would it be the deed restriction based upon the one pronoun that cannot be used as a subject? Or the forecast of the maybe Chevrolet IROC Z28 in the Alpha-Americas 213 and Galveston County in the area code Los Angeles presenting, all the Alpha-Americas that ultimately lead to something like the United States Secretary of Treasury, Robert D. Rubin, identifying phenomenally huge category of like Citigroup as like in Detroit, not far from like General Motors, and how de facto is like predominantly probably one of the biggest words involving corporate terminology as annuity as compared to litigation de facto, whereas habeas corpus ultimately being some idea of a deed restriction of settlement, is really what I see Robert E. Rubin involving, as the United States Secretary of Treasury, like, he just seems to be, it involving de facto and General Motors and Citigroup as the idea of identifying, what an endorsement is or a signature, an ethnic background, or the thought of intellectual duration of lifespan and what that is, and the method of banking as compared to holding, or, some idea like, well, it's not blackmail, but, like, what is that boycott and embargo about? As a method of holding. So, is it a method of holding involving banking masturbation or sign of circumcision, or would that be consensual reputation? I'm tired of, like, skipping the crap, okay? So, like, what does, like, all the presidents have to say about it? Secret Service and International Secret Service. So, is it ultimately really getting to a deed restriction? And what is that? An X-ray as a God created woman for one rib of a man? Or is that really the separation between church and state? Or really loss prevention, a secret de facto, as like Vantage Love 30, being secret de facto 30? Ultimately it's really getting to it. So like, what's the President of the United States have to say about it involving international financial management as immigration custom enforcement? Is that like primate spawning and something like, was that hors d'oeuvres and caviar? In the Prince of Wales? Trying to like simulate some idea of like liquid equity and primate spawning? Come on. Or is it like presenting maybe a projected estimate opposite in futures, maybe some infrastructure beyond the front lines of the Vitron as verbatim, and there's some like diaphragm, like screensaver involved, and some idea is it's protected. Like a patent, huh? Got some verbatim. Is that like a deed restriction verbatim? Computer programming and language, huh? Is verbatim, is that like aggressive? Maybe, so take action out. Is that like verbatim? As like computer technology's idea of like a deed restriction? Or maybe it's not the antisocial, or is it the question of like, well, you mean there's the word comparison is involved with a question as compared to compatibility of more so of not knowing as comparison? Or maybe opinionated as maybe a preference as compared to only what compatibility would only mean based upon, academic achievement, or, some idea maybe not limited to. In any case, that's something that's really on my mind, and it seemed to be the significance of whether, if like litigation, litigation de facto and res habeas corpus is the only idea of a deed restriction. If it's ultimately getting to, if it's really getting to the factor of like the spore stone as a forecast, ultimately getting to the 4 inches of a newborn child at the time the footprints are put on, and how graphite is from that point on all the way through like papermate and biometrics, going into the life drive, even the copying process. It's ultimately, the idea that whether or not if ultimately, so like, where's all that information at? Involving, really where it seems to be like really at right now in Pearland, Texas. So like, who has what and using what? So what does that mean, as verbatim? Would that be the Contra affair? The infrastructure verbatim as a diaphragm? Or would it be maybe a screensaver of comparison? A screensaver as compatibility as compared to a diaphragm? Or would it be the ethnic background of like, well, wait a minute, are you dyslexic? What are you referring to? A colon double foresight? But have you seen my semicolon? Come on, who are you kidding, okay? Is that like verbatim as a deed restriction? Between the infrastructure or a contra affair of the word verbatim. It seemed to be, is it really that the screensaver is some idea of verbatim as a diaphragm? Is that like the contra affair? Or is it the infrastructure of like compatibility or good intentions or projected estimate option in the future as some like prepaid postage? So like really that's where it's at like right now, the way I'm thinking about it, okay? But in any case, yeah, so like, I'm going to probably go ahead and it's already going on 55 minutes and like 20 seconds. And really I'm probably going to wait and maybe do this again. I don't know if I'm going to upload this right now. I probably will, but this window right here, it seemed to be like, really it seemed to be the deal about the vertical magazine and like being lifted straight up. And it doesn't seem to be quite as big. I'm not sure if an emergency operating room is on that. At all. I'm not sure, what's involved with that one particular deal, or if it's at the same place at the same time. Although, like, Trump and Vladimir is like 88, and that is two people, and, Highway 288, okay? Ultimately, in my mind, it's like the Houston Astros and California Angels and Nolan Ryan Expressway. It's identified as South Freeway 288 now. Predominantly previously it was like Nolan Ryan Expressway. And it seemed to be whether or not now if the deal about Trump, this being the year 2025, and Vladimir being, both 88, or the Roosevelt New Deal Act representing Trump and Vladimir representing some idea from Theodore to Franklin Roosevelt of the New Deal Act. And ultimately, the International Electronic Engineering and OPEC seem to be the thing about, Texas and New Mexico power. Even Moses, for real, in the plateau and atonement, and Center Point Energy and all that information, it seems to be like, the thing like right now about, getting Texas and New Mexico power beyond. So get smart, get Maxwell smart, and, do about, Mercedes introducing the Smart for 2 car, and ultimately, even the thing about Lexus LFSA and even the Saturn Sky and Scion IQ. But anyway, it's like going on like getting close to an hour now. But I just want to say this right now, that it seemed to be that one magazine about the vertical magazine of the presidential helicopters, in my mind something about it would seem to be the crew involving this one particular location and being lifted at a 90-degree right angle straight up about getting in it. And I'm not sure if my memory even serves me correctly. About anything I'm talking about right now about it. Maybe it's just the viewpoint. And the thing about the incoherence and StarGate program and the intensity of like many locations during a duration. It seemed to be what might be an entire like year now, involving WE International Electronic Power and Selective Service, and what obviously is including the Vice President Network, and like Immigration, Customs Enforcement, and importing and exporting, and the deal about, the thing about, the aggregates of monetary domestic gross national product, and what all that is in circuit of multinational corporations, yeah. So, it's like the big spender. It's the big spender, yeah. So, like, that's what I think about it, because I put a lot of time into, approaching, and this is like new, one of the latest deals. But anyway, there it is. It's already going on 58 minutes and like 23 seconds. So, you know what? I think I'll just kind of like stop right there and take a break, okay? Yeah.